You are not bad with money. That is actually the problem. You track, you plan, you research before you spend, you feel guilty when you don't. You've read the articles, listened to the podcasts, and built the spreadsheet that 3 different versions of you have tried to maintain. And somewhere in all of that effort, somewhere in all of that doing everything right, you stopped feeling okay. Not broke, not irresponsible, just never quite settled. That feeling has a name, and it isn't anxiety, it isn't poor financial literacy. It is something that lives inside the identity of people who are genuinely good at managing money, and it is slowly, quietly making the whole thing feel unbearable. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what is happening inside you when financial perfection becomes the only version of yourself you trust. Let's be clear about who you are before we go any further. You are not someone who avoids their finances. You are not someone who spends recklessly or ignores debt or pretends the future doesn't exist. If anything, you are the opposite of that person. You are the one in your friend group who actually has a budget. You are the one who thought about retirement before your peers had even started their first savings account. You are the one who reads the fine print. And none of that is small. In a world that doesn't really teach financial discipline, you built yours from scratch, through discipline, through some fear, through the quiet determination that you were not going to end up struggling the way maybe your parents did, or the way you once did, or the way you watched people around you do. You worked for this identity, the responsible one, the one who has it together, the one people come to with money questions. And the thing about building an identity through financial responsibility is that it works. It genuinely works. You probably are more stable than most people around you. You probably do make better decisions. The net worth numbers, the savings rate, the debt-to-income ratio, they are almost certainly better than average. But here is what nobody tells you about building your identity around being financially responsible. At some point, the identity stops serving you, and you start serving the identity. There is a specific kind of trap that catches people who are genuinely good with money. It doesn't catch people who are careless. It doesn't catch people who avoid their finances or spend impulsively without thinking. It specifically, almost surgically, catches the people who care the most. And the trap looks like this. You start with a standard. Maybe it's a savings rate. Maybe it's a rule about never carrying a credit card balance. Maybe it's a number you've decided represents real financial security, a number that once you hit it means you can breathe. Maybe it's a version of your budget that finally works exactly as designed, month after month, without a single unexpected variable throwing it off. The standard itself is reasonable, maybe even admirable, but something happens over time. The standard stops being a goal and becomes a threshold for self-worth. Missing the savings target in a given month isn't just disappointing, it means something about you. Carrying a small balance on a card, even briefly, even for a legitimate reason, isn't just a temporary financial reality, it feels like a moral failure. The unexpected car repair that disrupts your carefully maintained budget isn't just an inconvenience, it feels like proof that you haven't really gotten it together, that the stability you've built is fragile, that the identity you've worked for is somehow conditional. This is the betrayal. You built a financial life around responsibility, and responsibility, somewhere along the way, became perfectionism. And perfectionism is not a higher level of responsibility. It is responsibility that has curdled. It is the same energy, but pointed inward, not at the money itself, but at you. And here is what makes this so difficult to see. Financial perfectionism feels like diligence. It feels like discipline. It looks from the outside exactly like the behavior of someone who has their finances completely under control. The person experiencing it is often the last one to recognize that something has gone wrong, because everything they are doing looks right. To understand what is actually happening, you need to look at a single mechanism, one loop, And once you see it, you will recognize it everywhere in your financial life. It starts with a belief that formed early, not necessarily in childhood, though often there. A belief that your safety, your stability, your worth, your place in the world is something you have to earn through performance. That being okay is not a default state, it is an achievement, and achievements require maintenance. For many people, this belief attached itself to money, because money is concrete, money is measurable. You can look at a number and know with apparent certainty whether you passed or failed. And for someone whose nervous system learned that safety comes from performance, a measurable standard feels like relief. It feels like control. So you build standards, you build systems, you build the budget and the savings goals and the spreadsheet. And when you meet the standard, there's a brief moment of calm, a brief sense that you are okay, that you have done enough, that you are safe. But it is only a moment, because the belief underneath, the one that says your safety is conditional on your performance, does not go away when you hit a target. It just moves the target, or it starts asking whether you hit the target correctly, whether you could have hit it sooner, whether the next target is being met with the same rigor. This is the loop. The thought is, if I get this exactly right, I will feel secure. The emotion is a low-grade vigilance, not quite fear, not quite peace, but something in between, a state of permanent low-level monitoring. You tell yourself you're being careful, but then you realized you checked your banking app 4 times in one afternoon, not because anything changed, just because uncertainty itself had started to feel unbearable. And that's the moment this stops being about money. The behavior is constant checking, refining, adjusting, optimizing. And the result of the behavior is not relief. It is a brief reprieve followed by the next version of the same anxiety. Because the goal was never really the savings rate. The goal, the emotional goal, the one driving the whole system, was to feel okay, to feel like enough, to feel like the ground beneath you is solid. And no spreadsheet, no matter how carefully maintained, can do that. Not because spreadsheets don't matter, they do, but because the anxiety isn't actually about the money, it is about identity. It is about the belief that you are only as safe, only as worthy as your last financial decision. And that belief is remarkably resistant to evidence. You could be doing extremely well by any objective measure and still feel the specific low-grade dread of someone who is one bad month away from losing everything. Not financially, but in the story you tell yourself about who you are. This channel, Smart Money Sabotage, exists specifically to name these patterns, the ones that live underneath the decisions, the ones that intelligent people carry quietly, often for years, because they look too much like virtue to question.
So what does this actually look like in the texture of a real life? Not in dramatic moments, in the ordinary ones. It looks like spending 40 minutes researching a $40 purchase, not because you can't afford it, but because spending it without being absolutely certain it's the optimal choice feels reckless. Diligence, it is a ritual, a way of earning permission. It looks like a vacation that was planned, budgeted, and saved for, and yet somehow every meal feels like a calculation. Every unexpected expense triggers a quiet internal audit. You are physically present on the trip, and financially somewhere else entirely, running numbers, questioning decisions, wondering if this was really the right week to spend this money. The vacation was supposed to be a reward. It became an exam. It looks like the guilt that arrives after a perfectly normal grocery run that came in slightly over the mental budget you had assigned it. Not dramatically over, $15. And yet that $15 follows you for 3 days, surfaces when you're trying to sleep, reappears when you're sitting in a meeting, quietly undermines the satisfaction of a week that was otherwise fine by any reasonable standard. It looks like the relationship friction that nobody in the house names directly, because one partner optimizes constantly, checks the accounts more than necessary, questions spending that was already agreed upon, brings a certain tension to financial conversations that never quite resolves, and the other partner learns to feel like a liability, learns to hide small purchases, learns that financial conversations come with a low ceiling on lightness, and the financial perfectionist doesn't understand why the atmosphere in those conversations feels so heavy. They're just being responsible. It looks like the moment when someone suggests you treat yourself, genuinely, freely, without a plan, and the first thing you feel is not pleasure, but exposure, as if spending freely even once, even with your own money, is evidence of something you don't want to be. None of these are extreme examples. That is the point. Financial perfectionism does not announce itself in crisis. It settles into the background frequency of daily life and slowly raises the cost of being alive.
There is a version of the future that nobody talks about when they talk about good financial habits. It is the version where you did everything right. The savings rate was maintained, the debt was eliminated, the investments were consistent and thoughtful. The net worth number, if you looked at it objectively, would make most people feel secure. And you still don't feel okay. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone can see from the outside, but in the quiet way of someone who has spent years performing financial perfectionism and has almost no memory of what it felt like to exist in their own money life without vigilance. There is a cost to that, and it does not show up in any ledger. The first cost is presence. Not the big moments, the trips, the milestones. Those you plan for. The cost is in the small moments. The dinner where you were physically there but mentally calculating whether the restaurant was worth it. The afternoon with your children where the background noise of a financial worry you cannot locate or resolve took up real space in your attention. The morning where the first thing your mind did before you were fully awake was run a quiet audit of where you stood. Presence is not infinite. And eventually, you notice something disturbing. You became financially secure without ever feeling safe. And after a while, vigilance starts feeling more familiar than peace. The second cost is identity narrowing. Over time, the responsible one becomes a role that is almost impossible to step out of, even when stepping out of it would be healthy. You cannot take the financial risk that might open something new because financial risk, even calculated and appropriate risk, feels like a betrayal of who you are. You cannot make a decision that prioritizes experience over optimization because that would mean being someone who values experience over optimization, and that is not who you have agreed to be. The identity that was built to protect you begins to constrain you, and you can't quite see it happening because you're too close to it. The third cost, and this one is the quietest, is the erosion of the relationship between you and your own life. Money is a tool. At its most functional, it is something that allows you to build a life with greater freedom. But when financial perfectionism takes hold, the relationship inverts. Your life becomes the thing that money evaluates. Every decision, every experience, every period of ease or indulgence gets measured against the standard. And over a long enough horizon time, you realize you've been managing a financial life rather than living the life the money was supposed to support. You built all of this to feel secure, and the architecture you built, meticulous, disciplined, carefully maintained, became the thing standing between you and the feeling you were trying to reach.
Let that sit for a moment, because this is the part that doesn't fit neatly anywhere. The part that isn't about strategy or behavior or pattern identification. The part that is just true and needs to be acknowledged quietly. You worked very hard for this. You built something real. And at some point, What you built started costing you something you cannot calculate. Not money, peace. And the absence of peace is not a sign that you failed. It is a sign that the system you built was designed to solve a problem that money cannot actually solve. There are a set of things that are true for some people watching this. You do not need to answer them out loud. You just need to notice whether they are true for you. You feel calmer when you check your accounts than when you don't, but the calm lasts less than an hour before the monitoring begins again. You have calculated, at least once in the past month, how long your savings would last if your income stopped tomorrow. Not as a planning exercise, but as a way of managing a low-level fear that never entirely goes away. You have felt genuine guilt about a financial decision that, by any objective standard, was completely fine. And maybe the strangest part, most people around you think you're the financially stable one. You have had a conversation about money with someone close to you that left them feeling judged or monitored, even though you did not intend that. You have postponed something you genuinely wanted, a trip, an experience, a course, something, not because you couldn't afford it, but because spending the money felt like it required a level of certainty you couldn't reach. You are aware that you have more financial stability than many people around you, and yet you do not feel more stable than them. You feel, if anything, more vigilant. You believe, somewhere beneath the spreadsheets and the systems, that if you stop watching, if you relax your grip even slightly, something will go wrong. Not necessarily something specific, just something. These patterns are trying to solve something. That is why they persist.
Financial perfectionism is not a financial problem. You already know that, somewhere. You have known it for a while. The numbers are fine. The habits are good. The problem is not in the ledger. The problem is in the story you have been telling yourself about what the ledger means about you. And stories, unlike spreadsheets, cannot be optimized. They can only be observed. The first thing that happens when someone begins to genuinely observe this pattern, not fix it, not resolve it, just observe it, is that it loses some of its automatic power. The checking behavior, the guilt response, the inability to spend without internally justifying the expenditure, these things do not disappear overnight, but they become slightly less invisible. They become things you can watch yourself doing rather than things that simply happen to you. That distance, that small gap between the behavior and the awareness of the behavior, is where something begins to change. Not through discipline, not through a new system, not through trying harder to be responsible or trying harder to relax, through recognition. Through the moment when you can observe yourself performing financial perfectionism and understand with some clarity what the performance has been for, what it has been protecting, what it costs, what it has never actually been able to deliver. You did not become financially careful for no reason. The care was functional at some point. It served something real. The question that becomes available once you can see the pattern clearly enough to ask it is whether it is still serving you now, or whether it has become the habit of a person you had to be, running inside the life of a person you have already become. That question does not need to be answered today, but it is worth letting it be present. Financial perfectionism is quiet. That is part of what makes it so persistent. It does not look like a problem. It looks like virtue. It looks like the very thing you were supposed to build. And that is precisely why it takes so long to name. If you watched this entire video, something in you already recognized it, not as a concept, as something lived, as the specific texture of what it feels like to work very hard for a kind of peace that the working itself keeps pushing further away. You don't need to do anything with that recognition right now. But there is one question worth sitting with before you open another tab or check another account. If the money were already enough, if you,
were already enough, what would you stop doing? Smart money sabotage. Understanding the patterns underneath the decisions.